Hello, welcome to the next episode of the J plus R movie podcast. Another two-part episode. Part one, we're going to be discussing Mysterious Skin. So, and by the way, trigger warning as well, just given how this film will be dealing with very dark, disturbing, sensitive subject matter. So if you get uncomfortable and you want to click off, that's perfectly fine. Setup is it kind of follows the branching lives of a couple of different young men in Iowa. One of them is named Neil, the other one's named Brian. Neil is a male prostitute, and Brian is totally obsessed with learning about something that happened in his past where just for some reason 5 hours disappeared from his memory. He thinks that alien abductions had something to do with it, but then it turns out that what happened with Brian is in his past is intertwined with Neil's past, and we're kind of following their experiences, but then we're also following out how these two eventually kind of come together and how they are connected and how they are linked by this shared trauma that they had in there, like when they were children, essentially. I really liked it. It's not an entertaining sit, or at least not a traditionally entertaining sit by any means. It's very powerful. It's disturbing, but it's also got this sense of innocence.
Got this connection between just innocence and the corruption of that. It works really, really well because it's so subjective in the way that it presents itself. Despite the fact that obviously, as a viewer, your brain knows what's up, and I think knows pretty early what's up. But because it is so subjective, it takes you into the perspective really well. So it almost, because you can see it, and it almost plays on dramatic irony to give itself the impact. And I think it does it brilliantly.
Despite the darkness of the film, there is somewhat of the sense of optimism. There is somewhat of the sense of what's going on isn't too bad. But all throughout the film, given what we see at the beginning, and given the foreshadowing to what happens at the end, it's specifically with Neil and the last client that he has, the film is always telling you that it is very dark. The kind of imagery and what's happening isn't always so dark. It's not one of those films that basically just beats you over the head with how dark and edgy it is. It's the kind of film where it just is dark because it's essentially about trauma.
Well, the impact of trauma and child sexuality, inherently, that is just going to be a dark film. The fact that it's not presented dark almost makes it feel worse. This is the scene that sticks with me, I think, the most, because it is just so transparent. Obviously, when you know what's going on. But to be fair, I found it transparent to begin with. But when the Little League coach takes Neil back to his flat for the first time, within the first 15 minutes, and this is the scene that really stuck with. He's just asking questions, just as they're playing games, like, "Oh, so your mum's not expecting you back," and kind of things like that. You can always see him figuring out that he can victimize this kid, and that's uncomfortable enough. And then the photographs start being taken, and nothing of the abusive nature what did later happened in that moment, but it's coming, just from the way it's being treated, because it's not going to be stopped, because you've seen that his mum and his boyfriend don't actually care about his well-being that well, or even if they do, they're not around enough to notice his well-being and things like that. So you know that it's gonna happen.
What I kind of loved as well is that since the whole film is kind of also about memory and the way that memory can be kind of distorted and the perspective can be taken, and especially given the way that Neil views this memory of his coach molesting him. I quite liked how the stuff that was going on screen, there was again arguably the sense of weird innocence to it. But if you know anything about even basic stranger danger or anything, you already know that what's going on screen is very, very bad. And yeah, it increases further as he does the voice recording as he takes the photos as well. It's if you know that something bad's going to happen, and then they actually get to depicting it. I think it's probably impossible to watch the bit where they basically kind of show without actually showing Neil getting raped, basically. I think it's impossible to watch that scene without either internally yelling or just turning your eye away or something. And that's not necessarily because they show it on screen. it's more the way that they show it, because they make that sequence so uncomfortable. What they do throughout the film is that there's a lot of interplay with like POV, how oftentimes they'll just show one person on screen, and maybe if they're having a conversation with somebody else, it will just be that person and then the other person, individually. But in that sequence as well, it's the most distinctive part, because it's just the kid and it's just the coach, and he just kind of leans in, he says some really creepy shit, and essentially, and then he like puts Neo on the floor and stuff, and it's like the kind of thing that you feel because of the filmmaking, and the kind of thing that you can imagine happening, and that does happen.
It very much could happen, and you know it could. Yeah, I agree. It is just a terrifying moment because you are so close to Neil in that moment. Like,
you're close to the coach, especially like the way he just peers down is partially just because they wanted to like make sure that the kid wasn't actually like there for any of the darker moments that they're trying to like imply. So it's just through editing, but that makes it scary because when it's not showing Neil, you're imagining it's from Neil's perspective, and so to some degree I think that that's almost like a test. It's almost like the film was saying, like, if you don't like this, then you might as well just leave now, because it's not going to get any happier.
Quite early in the film that is shown as well. I think it's 13-minute mark, or is it a bit?
Yeah, around that time.
You just see Neil on that floor, and just like just in that moment how bad things actually are. Just preceding it, or just a couple scenes preceding it, you see him, the coach, showing him pictures of things and just throwing Fruit Loops in the air. Like,
yeah, the coach has like a scrapbook of like photos that he took of Neil as well, and telling.
You can see him just trying to be like, you're my special kid.
This stuff at the beginning with the coach, it's the kind of stuff that I feel in the wrong hands could have gone really bad, and I think it could have gone bad because the point of the sequence, essentially, the point of this opening is basically it's to, on the one hand, depict the horrible stuff that happened to Neil, but it's also to kind of make you understand how Neil could, in some ways, romanticize this memory, could in some way romanticize the coach's perverted, awful sexual attraction to him. I think that like it achieves that balance well, because you understand how Neil could romanticize a memory like that, but at the same time, the film itself is not romanticizing it at all.
Just left to your imagination what happened, and that it was probably forced to be reciprocal as well, and it was just. And then you see the impact on Neil, and especially in the way that he engages with the clients, because there's that thumb in the mouth thing that was done with the coach, creating the abuse every single time he's with a client. Let's take that type, and there's a really uncomfortable implication with the mother's boyfriend, in a very psychoanalytic way. It's it's almost like he had that attraction to his mother's boyfriend, and it translated onto the coach, who then gave him what his child mind was attracted to, and so he convinced himself that it wasn't as bad as it was. And
the first time we see Neil, and this also could have been a lot more uncomfortable than it was, but thankfully it's not as uncomfortable as it could be, watching his mother have sex with like one of her boyfriends, and since he's gay, he's just focusing on the guy, and he's like jerking off for the first time, and they mentioned that the guy has the kind of look that became Neil's type, essentially. So that already was like a formative for Neil, and then the coach just so happened to kind of look like that as well. So therefore, that's why, upon first sight, Neil felt attracted to him, and what the film was kind of suggesting, in a sense, that's partially how the coach was able to do that to him, because Neil was already physically attracted to him, so therefore the coach could manipulate that, essentially.
Yeah, exactly, which he obviously did. And obviously, as the film goes on, he starts to recognize, the abuse he had gone through, and especially at the end, when he has fully realized that he was a victim, that he didn't want what had happened to him, it just did. Because he did feel that attraction, he kind of gets the sense that it's kind of, I was an active part of that, but he wasn't. You see that trauma play out in the way he becomes a prostitute in a way it seems like an attempt for sexual agency, and to kind of, as a viewer, that's not what it is. He's got that distorted perception of what happened and how it happened, and it really becomes this horrifying effect later on. And then when you see them both later on almost confronting it, and you almost have this spectral version of the coach there at the 1:33 mark, when they kind of reveal that, obviously he was an alien and abducted, and then it was coach, which he obviously knew throughout, but when it was clarified in his mind,
like when they show the coach and he's like shadowed,
focus, and then when Bryan realizes what happened, and then Neil and Bryan are almost looking at each other, and that's the moment they're coming to terms with it.
So obviously the male prostitution angle, it's kind of, you're right, it is like he does want sexual agency. It's also just a sign of just him being a very reckless person as well. He kind of wants what he had with the coach, but in a different way, and so therefore he's becoming a male prostitute, and it's specifically he's going after like older men as well. He wants to have sex with like older men specifically, and through these experiences it kind of shows you the wide spectrum of like what can happen. So in the third act of the film, Neil, he goes to New York City and he has like 3 clients that he meets there, and the first scene as well isn't like too bad. The guy's a bit aggressive to begin with, but I think that that's maybe the only time when Neil does have any of this like sexual agency that you're pointing out, because he gets given the condom and then he starts like having anal sex with that guy, and the feeling that I got was that Neil was very much in control.
I don't think he ever was, but you could tell that he believed he was. I think that's what was going on throughout the film. It almost seemed like the whole career path was his attempt to kind of gain control and be in control of the childhood situation, because every single one was an echo of that. Showed the impact of what had happened. One of them had completely denied reality, and the other one had almost tried to reconstruct the narrative so that they weren't a victim as such. I think it was a really great exploration of obviously the darker sides of trauma and how difficult it can be to accept.
It's also like a good kind of depiction as well of like, again, the dangers of being a male prostitute. I think it's shown in the second client that Neil meets, where he doesn't actually want Neil to have sex with him. It's unspoken, but he has like an AIDS-like disease, because you can see by the blemishes on his chest, on this old man's chest. He just like lies on the bed and just tells Neil to like rub his back. And that's definitely like the turning point for Neil, because it was in the early 90s, so that's when like AIDS was becoming well known and more public. So obviously, so that's definitely a reason for Neil to stop being a male prostitute. But it's also kind of like, it's a very like sad moment, because like it's sad on the part of this guy, but it's also sad for Neil as well. It's sad for him, and it's like it's the first time that he denied what he previously always did during his other encounters. He can't have sex with this guy at all, and it is a wake-up call, definitely. As for the storyline with like Bryan, the way that they handle that as well is quite effective, because again, it could have been very cheesy the way they do it, because they bring on the whole subject of alien abductions, and there's even that bit early on where they literally see a UFO, where there's a UFO sighting. I don't know if that was supposed to actually be a UFO, or if it was just supposed to be something that they thought looked like one. But
I think it was probably meant to be something that they thought looked like one, and he was latching on to that. At that point, obviously, he both knew and didn't know really what had gone on, so he kind of went, "Oh, that makes sense." You could see him looking for something. He needed something, and he couldn't. You could see the way that he was interacting with his mother. He couldn't get what he wanted as he was going forward, and he was very shut off. And then when the UFO came, it almost gave him the reasoning so that he didn't have to confront what had happened.
I agree, yeah.
And it wasn't done in a way that diminished Bryan's character at all or anything like that. It just was shown to be just a response. And I think the fact that it wasn't played for, oh, he's a nutter or anything like that was really, really good. I think they could have easily played it that way, like they do for a lot of things to do with alien abduction stories in film, and that.
Yeah, he could have been wearing like tinfoil on his head, or he could have like, I don't know, been like up. They could have done the whole conspiracy theorist angle with him, because the way that they do it, it's essentially Bryan is kind of in denial, but he's also not. Like he's not necessarily that he's in denial. It's more just he's searching for an answer, and that's just kind of what he latches onto. And I quite liked as well the way, again, similarly, where it's not mocking, I like the way the relationship between him and Evelyn, the woman who appears on the TV, till they do something at the end. For the most part, it's a very genuine friendship. You can buy that something must have happened to this woman that did literally scar her, but she just embraces that a bit more strongly, to the point of like appearing on like a documentary. So there is this shared experience between the two of them, and the way that they end that, I will admit that at first I thought it kind of came out of nowhere, where she just tries to like have sex with him, essentially, where she tries to come onto him. At first, I thought that kind of came out of nowhere. Looking back on it, however, I can believe it. Honestly, it does seem a bit out of nowhere, but that being said, I can believe that she would misread their relationship, and also I can believe that, like, especially if something like what happened to Bryan happened to her as well, I can believe that she would probably do that. I can believe that she would probably just, again, do like act inappropriately like that.
I got the sense that she was clinging to someone who might be able to understand her in a way.
Just like how she was helping Bryan understand himself.
Yeah, she kind of thought she was helping him understand himself, and he could understand what she was going through when when they were ready to actually have that full discussion. And I think she almost saw that reciprocal attachment, and get the sense that there are attachment issues because she got someone who she sees kinship in and knows must or believes must see kinship in her. She believes that that's all that they need to have that a romantic and or at least sexual connection. Kind of a good example of how ideas around attachment and things like that can be messed up by trauma.
Tries to come onto him, and then he like pushes her away, and he doesn't want to talk to her anymore because obviously what happened to him was so traumatizing that he can't even if the encounter was totally consensual, probably would still shy away from it because he just can't have anything to do with like sex after what happened, and he knows it. I want to talk about the technical aspects because I think that by far is the best part of this film. So we already talked about like the camera work in general. I really love the editing and direction overall because it almost simulated the feeling of having a memory, like having a memory that you don't want to think about, essentially. So therefore, like the way that the film is cut together, it's very fast cutting. It's not a lot of long takes.
It's almost like they're flashes of moments rather than moments. And again, to go back to the opening, just because although the rest of the film was fantastic, just the opening, the 15 minutes really stuck with me for some reason. I think the way that they cross cut between two of them throughout the film works really, really well. But the way that you get, especially in Neil's story, it's just it goes from meeting coach, little league game. It's got the narration over it, and I think the narration is actually a very good element of film when it comes in, adds that subjective lens, which helps you empathise a lot easier. For me, it's the speed in which that moves, and just they show you exactly what you need to get the gist. But also, there's stuff missing, and it's jumping around. There's stuff missing, and it really highlights, the way different memories are connected, and the way it's not necessarily linear. There are linked concepts and linked moments that might be jumping around. Like, for example, he clearly links the coach with the first time he was able to, ejaculate.
That's from that boyfriend to the coach, and that was a touch that I didn't notice the first time. But looking back, I was like, oh yeah, that cuts to the coach.
I thought that was well done and gets you psychologically primed to understand these characters a lot better, so that when different moments come up, like, for example, a turning point for Neil, he suddenly can't have sex, and that sex was a big drive for him. It forces him to confront the way he has had sex because he can't do it now. The thing that his character is kind of been almost defined by, in a way, as it goes forward, is suddenly taken away. And also with Bryan, you get that shot in the rain, you get the nose bleed, you get the covered, you get that something's in the dark and hidden away, and then it comes back at the end, and it's the same shot with the rain, same little league, and then dominant shot of the coach from down the same way that it was shot when he came to pick up Neil earlier in the opening, and the way that's mirrored, and then it clicks. You're like, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god. Even though you knew anyway, like you or at least suspected that had happened. That the way it was confirmed, the way they mirrored it, the way they mirrored shots throughout, and the way they got that structure together, and led to that really uncomfortable feeling as you watched them figure it out, and as you watched them come to terms with it, and then it made that ending, touching to see them finally able to confront each other and find comfort in each other and kind of validate each other's experiences, but at the same time it just adds to the tragedy of the whole thing as well.
There's a lot that can be said about a lot of the direction. There are even some, like, again, cool, like, subtle details, like the opening credits, for example, the way the serial falling down, it goes from like slow frame rate, and then title card it goes to normal speed. Other bits as well, like in the bit where Bryan puts his like fist into the dead cow, and it's showing the montage of like what it looks to be him like lying on a thing with like an alien trying to get like touching his head or something, but then it turns into like oh no, now it's a normal floor. Oh, now it's a human hand. Now it's. And then I think like Neil appears in that bit. Little subtle shots, like one shot of that I remember specifically was like one shot where it's like mother is telling him like, oh, the coach is taking the team out to a movie or something, and it's like Neil playing with toys, and in the background it's like blurred out as well, which sticks out as well because they only use that blurring out thing once, and that kind of gives to me the indication that Neil remembers like everything in so much detail aside from that moment. In terms of like the editing, it sticks out most at the end in that final scene you pointed out. So, like I'll admit when I was watching it, I was like almost in tears because it was so disturbing and fucked up. Like Neil was basically just describing the shared like molestation that was happening to both of them. The way it was edited was quite effective because like it would cut to the flashback and then it would just hard cut back to Bryan and then the music would just cut off. So that moment, it's almost like it's like a hard separation between what happened, like their memories of the past and where they are now.
It almost felt like they were constantly jumping back, between like they weren't in the present or in the past. They were somewhere in between it, and constantly they were a vicious cycle of jumping back and forth, and not being able to, not being able to move forward, and not being able to stay where they are, but at the same time not being able to go back to what they were either. And it really just gets into how much that obviously has impacted them, will continue to impact them, and what kind of the way that that's left them without making it look like they've got nothing worthwhile anymore.
Touch on like the characterization as well. It's definitely the nicest that Neil is shown, like right at the end. When he's like after when Bryan has that nosebleed again and he kind of hugs him. Neil isn't necessarily the most likable character. Like he's depicted as very reckless and very like selfish. But I think there are enough moments with Neil that make you thankfully not dislike him. Like his one interaction with the kid that during the base that kind of shows that like he hasn't grown up to be like the coach, thankfully. His friendships with like Wendy, who is kind of almost like his mother figure, more so than his actual mother. The fact that towards the end he does have the genuine desire to like save himself from this existence that he's put himself in, that he's somewhat chosen to do, but also not fully chosen to do. And then you have like other characters as well and their relationships. I quite liked how Neil's mother, what they could have easily done is they could have made her like a much worse mother than she actually was. But although they do somewhat hint that she is indirectly responsible for the situation that happened with Neil and the coach, they also depict her in a mostly innocent light. And I quite liked how they showed that there was still genuine love between her and Neil.
I like to acknowledge that she did love Neil, and there wasn't there wasn't intended malice, but at the same time it also didn't let her off the hook either. It was kind of there like she did neglect her child and left him exposed to. It both blamed her and it didn't at the same time. It kind of went, coach preyed on this boy, and it was the responsibility lies on him, but he also kind of puts there's stuff that could have at least helped with it, or at least not kept it so buried as a secret for all the years as well. And
the Wendy character, is his friend, is definitely more the one who's like looking out for Neil all throughout the film, like the one who's pointing out the what he's doing is like dangerous.
And she's kind of there like, look, I get this isn't safe. She doesn't ever like directly say you can't do this or this is the right response, but she does kind of go, look, this isn't great. This isn't going to be good for your health. This isn't good for you in general personally. He can't see that for a lot of the film. He can't, because to him he's like, no, this is my job, it's my work, I enjoy it, it's what it is. But he doesn't, and you can tell that he's almost convincing himself that this is the right way to go so that he can cope.
And he's the only person who knows the full truth about what happened to Neil as well. They also have like this like friend called Eric as well. Although he's not given like a full on plot line, he is there is some good stuff with him as well. Like for example, you get the sense that he likes Neil. He might like him as even more than a friend, but he doesn't go there. And there's that one scene where he finds evidence of Neil's molestation by the coach. He finds it, and it's just in Neil's drawer as well. And that was really like, oh my god, Neil keeps that stuff, just evidence of what happened to him in his past, just in his drawer. He doesn't even hide it. It's like he just and Eric, you see him like he has some of the photos, and he has some of the voice recordings as well, and it underlines Neil, but also it's kind of paying off the bit between Eric and Wendy, where Wendy's telling him like, look in Neil's heart you'll just find a black hole or something, and that's kind of him going into that black hole, and then but then with the Eric character they kind of show him befriending Bryan as well. Like when Bryan actually comes closer to meeting up with like Neil, he comes over to like Neil's house, and Bryan and Eric, they become, pretty friendly with each other. And so there's enough of these like kind of positive relationships to kind of offset the darkness of the story. And I think that that was necessary because if it was just a movie that was full of dysfunction, then it probably would have been too dark, I think. Like what happened in the past was dark enough. It's kind of good to show that in the present, the relationships that Neil has, and even the relationships that like Bryan has, for the most part, are fairly positive. But it still says that like even despite that, what happened to them still permanently has messed these two boys up.
Provides a very three-dimensional view of their lives. It doesn't take away that they can have positive experiences, but it still colours those experiences. It doesn't have to be the only thing they can focus on, and it doesn't mean they can never be connected to people, and it helps them support each other. And you get the idea that things not ease up, but they might have a more positive.
Yeah, like maybe Neil and Bryan, as a result of this, they might even like tell people about what happened to them. At the end of the film, they go back into the house of the coach, and it's pretty clear that it's just another family that's in the house. Specifically, say that the coach just disappeared and that they don't have any clue where he went. You could argue like it underlines how kind of anonymous evil people like that can be. How they can just like
they can just disappear into the void. How they're not always caught and. Unfortunately, that's still something that's got to be dealt with by the people that get left behind and hurt by these people. And in a way, they can't ever have closure.
It almost kind of doesn't even matter that it was that guy that did it. Guy could have been anybody. That guy could have been an alien. The whole point of it isn't look at what this guy did. Look at how
happened. Yeah. The fact that he's not there, the fact that it could happen anywhere, it could happen to anyone as well, and I think that's why I like the fact that they're such different characters as well. Start and right throughout, there's a lot. I think Bryan's character gets a lot more. When I say innocence, I don't mean in terms of culpability. I mean, Bryan's character clearly isn't. He doesn't know as much about kind of more sexual and selfish things and things like that, and he's not had exposure to those kind of things the same way that Neil has. It acknowledges, what is almost expected and what the stereotype kind of is on the one hand, and of abuse victims, and then undercuts it completely with the other side, and then shows that it doesn't matter quite what situation, what background, what the family life is like. It can still just happen, and they still go through very similar emotions. If they don't, not that they handle it the same way, but they still go through very similar kind of emotions. We'll both have to come to terms with it. The fact that it's going to have a severe impact on them no matter what happens.
There is the connection between like Neil and Bryan because it was the same guy, and the same guy did it to both of them at the same time in the climax, as revealed in the climax. The only reason why in the story it's the same guy is just to kind of bring these two together. Other than that, like it could have been somebody else, but
it helps give them the connection at the end. It gives the ending even more of an impact. Same trauma has affected both people, and how they're really the people that can help each other through it. Keeps the narrative a bit more of an emotional logic.
Acting in this movie is really great. Like one of the best kinds of acting is when you aren't really aware that they're actors. Like every line delivery to me felt real. It almost felt like you were watching real people, even though that some of these people are actors. The guy who played the coach was really good. They were good in terms of casting because they picked a very handsome man to play him. They picked a very attractive guy. They didn't pick like a guy who just looking at them you think like, wow, that guy looks like a creeper. But yet, like they got almost a model looking actor to play him, but he did he was very like subtly creepy.
Even though it is clear immediately from the crosscut between the boyfriend to the coach, because you just know where that's going.
Well, I think if you like have read like the plot synopsis or the summary, like depending on what it says, you already know what the film is about. That guy has to
know what it was about before I started watching it. I just got unsettled immediately because I looked at the boyfriend. I looked at what I could see. Obviously, the kid was deriving pleasure from it, and the fact that those two concepts were linked, and then seeing the coach, I was just like, oh, no.
That's a very smart pickup.
For me, again, it was part of the edit, giving you all the information you needed really quickly. It gave you the boyfriend. It gave you the character had an attraction to the boyfriend. You knew that the character was already in a almost sexually explorative stage, so you knew that was on his mind. You knew those were connected concepts, and then when you saw the coach, obviously it's cases like that. It's usually going to be the Little League coach, or it's going to be
Somebody will be around children.
In a cinematic context, that's the most likely kind of sources to see it. So when I saw the position, who sex was going to be a major concept of the film, and I knew there was a child attracted to the boyfriend that looks exactly like the coach. Oh no. Oh dear. Because I couldn't figure out why they would put that unless it was going to go in a certain way, and then it doesn't take away from the horror of it at all.
That actor did a really fantastic job. He was really, he was again really. He was very like subtly chilling because he had that smiley attitude. He had that like thing that maybe a kid could trust, but you saw beneath the surface.
See how he could almost trick the entire community into not believing it as well if it did come out, or you knew he could.
Yeah.
You could see how he could blend and how he could easily be trusted, and how he could seem charismatic. Seeing, especially from the moment you get into his apartment,
games and stuff, he's got all this stuff that, like, unless he was like an avid gamer, he probably wouldn't have. So I think he bought all of that stuff, like the pool table, the arcade machine, just to appease children.
You could see it was a very child-friendly thing, but you knew he wasn't married. You knew he didn't have kids because you could. There was no ring, there was no indication of anything in that regard, and you had shot again of Neil. They formed almost an instant connection. It's almost a very twisted perversion of a kind of love at first sight. It's almost an editing technique that they would use for. I really hate to put it like this because this isn't what I'm suggesting the moment feels like at all, but it's shot in the same way that some places shoot Romeo and Juliet meeting for the first time. Except
or just any romance and any like the first time the couple meet, there's the slow motion shot as you zoom into the person's face.
You get the person who kind of sees the design, and you get the shot of the other person looking up and looking there. But then the fact that it's done in the way it is, and they keep the power band, so it is a bit lower on, it's a bit more of a low angle on the coach, and it's a bit of a higher angle on Neil. But you still get the sense of disturbance, and the fact that they've done it like that, and that kind of shot construction is always seen as a mutual connection. It both helps you empathize with Neil's perspective, because in that moment he seems to see it at least in a more mutual context than it possibly could have been, and it unsettles you as well because you know it's wrong because of who the subjects of the shot are. Knowledge of what's morally acceptable anyway.
The two leads of the films, Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays Neil, and Brady Corbett plays Brian. Both of them are fantastic. JGL, and he gives a very like energetic performance when he needs to be, but he also has a lot of subtlety when he needs to as well. Like in that scene where he's rubbing the guy's back, you can tell, like, he doesn't say a word in that scene, but you just know what he's thinking. He communicates it all just with his face. And sometimes when he's like recounting the story of what happened, you can tell in his voice he genuinely knows that what happened was bad, but he's being more casual about it than maybe one would expect. And we forgot to mention the third client. That scene was fucking horrific, where the third client just straight up rapes him, essentially. And it's directed excellently. Like, there's no music, it's not sexualized remotely, it's extremely brutal, but also again his acting, like when he comes, when he's like coming back and stuff, and he's just like, he's in shock and then he just starts crying, like that bit was very powerfully acted by him.
You could see the character's attempts to almost act a bit hard and blasé about it, like, it's fine, stuff happened, almost in a way trying to take that ownership, and then when that ownership is completely stripped away from him. I mean, it was started to get stripped away with the second client because it didn't go according to the way he plans in the way it usually goes. And then when the third client completely took the power away and he realized that he'd never really had it in the first place. And
that was like Neil's trauma catching up with him, almost like he was being told, try romanticizing this now. Like this is exactly what happened to you, only you cannot romanticize.
It almost sets it up like, okay, you can't escape this. This is what it is. It sets up, that's my type, that's my thing. It kind of constructs this narrative of constant recreation. So, and I think it's very important that he stops there, because it almost serves its purpose of, it makes him confront it. He can't be blasé about it. He can't escape it. It's just brutal. It's ugly. It's horrible, and it hits him. And then, and only then, does his character start to move forward.
Beforehand, he does like get a new job. So there is the sign like already that he wants to escape from it. But him getting into the car with that third guy, it's definitely a kind of a, okay, well, maybe I can just, do this. But the whole time he's clearly considering leaving, like the bit where he looks up at the stairs, so it's like, so he's not entirely in the same kind of mindset as he was before, but he is still doing it. He's still going with this guy.
So, like, he's been primed for it, and that third one confirms that he needs that change. Yeah, I think it was that second moment where it didn't go as he expected, and he had to sit there and go, "Oh, that's not how this works." And then he realizes the way it was working is also not how it works as well, because you do get that separation, and then in that moment where it is so brutal and it almost punishes him for continuing, and that's when he moves back, and it's when he's able to start moving forward. And it's not that he ever forgets what happened or anything like that, but he sits there and he goes, "Okay, I can't keep going the way I am anymore. I can't just recreate it there. I'm not getting past. It's not a memory, it's life." And it puts him in the place where he can empathize again, and he softens at that point. He is able to engage emotionally more, which means he's able to be there for Bryan when it catches up with him as well. And he's able to be the kind of person he would probably almost want to be, or at least would have wanted someone to be for him.
Another great bit of acting from AGL, like at the end of it, when he's like describing all the horrific stuff the coach like made him do and made him and Bryan do, he's describing it in a slightly more casual tone than you'd expect, but he's also describing it in a sense of like, yeah, this happened, fucked up, ain't it? He's giving that kind of delivery, and that's very
and it's not what it was earlier. It's not romanticized anymore.
No, definitely not.
It's almost bluntly factual. It's not like he's explicitly saying, "God, this is the worst thing that could have ever happened," blah blah blah. But what he's doing, even though he's not quite there. But what he is doing is he's going, this is what happened to us. It's fucked up. It's terrible. We're both still here. Is kind of what he's doing. He's trying to help. It's his way of trying to help Bryan to get further to getting through it. And I think it's a beautiful moment, and it really defines the character development. And it's a very subtle form of character development as well. And it's not pretending that, he's had that epiphany and now everything's okay. It's kind of going, had that epiphany, and he's changing his approach, and he's trying to do his best.
And as for Brady Corbett's performance, he does great all throughout the film. Like, he plays his role with a lot of like subtlety, but again, he brings out the trauma that Bryan had gone through. He has that sort of like, soft-spoken, nice guy demeanor, but definitely also a lot of like nervousness. And there's that great moment where he confronts his absentee father, and he like yells for the first time. Great bit of acting from him, and his acting at the end is great too, because like when he's being told the story, he's kind of just looking like devastated and defeated, and then he has that nosebleed and he kind of freaks out.
He did fantastically. He treated it with sensitivity. I mean, you get the repression, you get the conflict, and you get you get a sense of someone who's trying to both not accept what happened and trying to come to terms with it at the same time. And it really pulls you into just empathizing with him. It feels so much sad. The fact that he's able to then go,
"You should have tried to ask me why,"
You should have noticed. You should have been there to notice things were bad. That's your job. That's your role that you didn't do. The fact that you get that moment of anger and that finally get that bit of self-respect that he doesn't seem to have. The fact that he's finally sitting there going, "No, my needs are important," which is a thing that he rejects throughout the film up to that point. Is you could tell there's something always on the surface that he almost wants to get out, but he can't, and he does neglect himself throughout the film. It's not a moment of necessarily overcoming, but it's a moment of him being able to sit there and go, things should be better than they are. And it just feels powerful because he's finally almost seeing himself as worth standing up for, and it kind of carries it forward. And I just think that was a really powerful moment. It was beautifully delivered. Still a little bit of hesitancy at the start of it, and then finally gets to go with it. And it doesn't represent a massively radical shift through the way he is, but it does do a radical shift in attitude that, although comes and goes a little bit, it consistently kind of props up again. A good bit of development, although there's the situation that what happens and the neglect and all of that will inevitably fuck you up a bit forever. It doesn't disable you
from being able to like actually have this form of self-discovery, or being able to actually have the desire to like turn your life in the direction that you want it to be in, rather than in the direction that maybe others might kind of put it in. The child acting I thought was quite good.
I think the child acting was fantastic, especially for child acting.
The kids, like, I think that like if the scene called for them to like be uncomfortable, they knew that it was bad, but they didn't know the specifics of what was.
No, they didn't. They were very clear on making the child actors not specifically know what was happening. But I think that again, although it was obviously done for child safety reasons and absolutely as it should have been, it also again added to the impact, because you could see the innocent mind trying to grapple, and it knew something was up, but it couldn't tell what, because it couldn't engage with those things because they're not for children. It's just made the whole thing seem so alien to children, and then them having to process it as adults, but not really having, although they've moved into a more adult perspective, they couldn't go back and edit the way that they've processed what happened. They have to completely reprocess it as adults and process the fact that they didn't process it as an adult would the first time as well.
I agree.
Honesty about it, and it just, it seems honest, it seems authentic, it seems tragic, and it doesn't belittle. I don't think it belittles at all, and I think that really helps just treat the situation with sensitivity and almost a sense of, despite how subjective it is, the film is delivered with all the POV shots that we've mentioned, just a sense of objectivity. It just displays this can happen. This is what people can feel. This is how it can work, and that's how it is. It doesn't matter what you think about it. That's how it is.
Yeah, I agree. And last thing that I just want to touch on as well, in terms of the technical side as well, music I really loved too. It's got this very like kind of dreamlike score. It's got this very like soft kind of style of music that kind of it helps in the scenes that are a bit more intentionally sentimental, like with the coach, kind of go with like the falsity of the sentimentality of those moments, but also again it helps in some of the more somewhat serious scenes as well. Particularly, I loved like the music when it was Neil and Wendy and they were like standing by that empty screen and then the snow started falling. That music was really beautiful. I quite like soundtrack as well. The use of like some pre-existing songs, like the cuts to Brian's 19th birthday. I thought that the song that played there was really good. The song that played during the opening credits was really solid, and I didn't even know that was a pre-existing song. I think it was like a remix of like a pre-existing song by one of the people who were part of The Who, Syd Barrett. It was a song that he did. I don't know if it's a song by The Who or anything, but whatever the case, it was a song that this guy who was a member of The Who did, and it was like remixed as well to have this very like like it was almost this choir like as like you had the opening credits, that was like what that was also like white on white as well, and that gave it a very like distorted dreamlike feeling, and then the way it then kind of sped up and just became more serious. That was really strong.
It was very effective. That use of music, I have to say, it really does get you. It got you in the kind of tone and the mood for it as well, because it at once gave a dreamlike, almost detached perspective to it, but then involved you and felt uncomfortable.
And it was the shot of like the stuff, the Fruit Loops falling on like child Neil as he's like kind of smiling, and it almost like looks like a shot out of like a commercial or something, and it's good, and it's a very innocent visual, but given the context of what you see later, it's actually kind of scary.
It feels a bit wrong anyway because it's just too white, too bright. It's, although obviously at the moment you're primed to associate it with innocence because nothing's happened yet, still subtly uncomfortable.
This could have just been like maybe the kid got sick of having to do this scene all the time, but the kid's smile didn't look real as well. It looked very forced, but that helps as well. So to mention any flaws, I think that there's only one problem that I did have with this film. There was one scene that I felt made it quite hard to sympathize with Neil, and there's this bit before that's intercut with like the scene where Brian loses his glasses, runs out into the woods, and then like gets like molested again by the coach. I kind of got why they did this, but I didn't really like it. It's this bit where like Neil, like and Wendy, they like take this I think special needs kid to the woods, and then they like put like fireworks in his mouth, and then Neil, because he obviously was taught that this is okay because of what he had gone through with the coach, he then starts like giving like oral sex to the boy. I mean, I know that Neil's just a kid and he doesn't really understand that what he's doing is bad, but I felt that scene was too much. It felt like it was trying to characterize Neil as being just as bad as the coach, but throughout the rest of the film, that's not the case at all.
It felt very wrong, obviously, because you get the shot of the kid with blood all over his mouth, and helped you understand Neil later in the film and the way he was. But I suppose it does also, capture the ugliness that can arise from it as well. And I like the fact that Neil obviously wasn't permanently down that path, but again, it does add to the way that Neil is and how jaded he is. Blasé, he does become about things. And I got conflicting thoughts on that scene.
It might not have mattered so much if Neil was shown to be just as bad as the coach, but since he's not, and again, I get the point of the scene, it's just something about it just felt very like out of place, and it's like that's a bit of an awful thing that Neil just did. The rest of the film, not as like, yeah, sure, he's reckless, but he's not quite that bad. I mean, which you could say is the point of like growth. Like, okay, well, Neil is still traumatized, but he's not blasé as he used to be. And I don't blame Neil for this at all, but they do somewhat acknowledge at the end that Neil was indirectly responsible for what happened to Bryan, because Neil obviously comes up to Bryan and says like, "Oh, hey, you can come home with us," but it's not Neil's fault, it's just
no, it's not. You can tell it acknowledges that Neil feels responsible for it.
He wanted to tell Bryan how sorry he was. He says that in the final narration. He said, "I wanted to tell how sorry he was. What happened
is really his fault." Almost shows how it can make someone a bit more culpable. And then obviously there is that element of hatred that Neil has. He does have it throughout the film, and despite how blasé he is, and you can tell it covers those kind of feelings.
His behaviour, you could argue, it's almost like he has like a self-punishment thing.
It's exactly what his lifestyle throughout the film is.
What I love about the film as well is how heavily it averts the whole notion. Sometimes whenever you see like male sexual assault in a film, at worst sometimes it's just outright played for laughs, but sometimes it is presented, but it's not really taken that seriously. But this film heavily averts that. It's like yeah, they're men, but rape is terrible no matter who it happens to. So in the film, again, all throughout the film, it's always about that. But that one scene did almost just forget that point. It forgot that he was kind of assaulting this like boy, and not much is being done about it afterwards. But again, the rest of the film, it's very much like sexual assault on men is bad. It's just as bad as if it was like a little girl who got assaulted. Aside from that one moment, I did love how the film completely averted that very problematic cliche.
It's one that I would recommend because it just works so well. It is a fantastic film, I think.
And this is kind of weird as well, but it's almost okay. I wouldn't actually do this, but it's almost the type of film that you could maybe show a kid. You wanted to like educate them on how to, I don't know, spot pedophiles or like how to avoid it. You could almost use this film as like an educational one.
I wouldn't show a child this film. I sort of get your point, with the scenes with the coach. You could, because it's all so implied. It could be used to almost demonstrate different, manipulative techniques, I suppose.
Those bits, not even the bit where it's showing the coach genuinely assaulting Neil. Like it's just showing that stuff, just being like
the Frogger scene.
If an adult says this, don't do it. Or if an adult says this, just say no or run or tell somebody. If somebody's doing this, just tell somebody.
I can see that. I think it would also help parents and things like that notice more things to show a way the process can happen. It does encourage a slight bit more vigilance.
And to make sure that, your sons aren't like, not that, you'd want anybody all slut shamey, but like to make sure that like parents make sure that their children aren't like, going out to like prostitute themselves at like a very young age or any of the male prostitution stuff with Neil was shown to be like very dangerous and seedy. So a level it could work as well. Don't be a male prostitute because it could be very, very dangerous, Overall, Skin, a very, very underrated movie. I would highly recommend it. It's very disturbing and powerful, but really well directed. It's really well acted. It's well written. It will definitely stick with you after it's done. If you've gone through anything like what the two boys went through in this film, I recommend it as well. It's an acknowledgement, and it's also kind of arguably could even be used as like a tool for like coming to terms with what's happened. It can be used in that way too, and in that level, I'd recommend it.
Powerful film. I think it's got a very important topic, and I would recommend watching it.
The next episode is going to be part 2, where we'll be discussing the Book of Henry. So see you in part 2. Bye.
And then having to process it as adults, but not really having, although they've moved into a more adult perspective, they couldn't go back and edit the way that they've processed what happened. They have to completely reprocess it as adults and process the fact that they didn't process it as an adult would the first time as well.
I agree.
Honesty about it, and it just, it seems honest, it seems authentic, it seems tragic, and it doesn't belittle. I don't think it belittles at all, and I think that really helps just treat the situation with sensitivity and almost a sense of, despite how subjective it is, the film is delivered with all the POV shots that we've mentioned, just a sense of objectivity. It just displays this can happen. This is what people can feel. This is how it can work, and that's how it is. It doesn't matter what you think about it. That's how it is.
Yeah, I agree. And last thing that I just want to touch on as well.